So we know that on Friday, President Trump really lashed out at, well, a number of people. One of them was the Fed chairman he appointed, Jay Powell, referred to him as an enemy. The former Reagan budget director, David Stockman, is with us now. And I said, David, before the break that you also think Jay Powell is the enemy, but I believe it's not for the same reasons that President Trump thinks that he's a, quote, enemy. So tell us.
Yes, for the opposite reason. The Fed and Powell is the enemy of prosperity, is the enemy of honest price discovery in the financial markets. These things are totally rigged with these repressed interest rates and the constant support of the stock market. The Fed is the enemy of savers and retirees. They've been savaged in terms of any return at all on savings. The Fed is the enemy of the wage earner. This ridiculous 2% inflation target basically eats away the meager gains that wage earners have been making. But most importantly, right, the idea that for 10 years, now this is really important, for 10 years, the federal funds rate, the overnight money rate, has been below the 2% inflation rate, which means we've had negative real money costs for 10 years. That's mother's milk for stock market speculators and traders on Wall Street. It has done nothing for Main Street, and it is putting us in a position where, nobody in Washington cares about borrowing or the deficit. We're going to have a $1.1 trillion deficit next year, in the 11th year of a business recovery, the longest in history. This is absurd. We're going to have a recession in a year or two. Surely they haven't been abolished. We'll have a $2 trillion annual deficit, and the debt is out of control.
Well, you're one of the few talking about it, right?
I
want to clearly. I'm going to get our panel involved, especially Anthony, in a moment, because he used to be the chief economist at J.P. Morgan. I wonder if he has a different view. But before I do that, David, you're one of the few, and the few that proud, right, to talk about the debt, the deficit all the time. Yeah. What is, as you kind of observe, we know you think it's a huge problem, and we kind of know from your views and with the talks we've had in the past what you think needs to be done. What do you think it's going to take for someone to act on it? Because the conventional wisdom had always been that the market would kind of have to force it with higher interest rates, and we're nowhere close to that. So what do you think it's going to take?
Well, I think it's going to take a thundering financial crisis in the bond market, and we're not that far away. We're in the mother of all bond bubbles in world history. There's 16 trillion trading at sub-zero. Except even last Friday, the U.S. yield curve all the way out to 30 went under 2%, which means it's under inflation. And it was the only bond in the world that even had a positive number in front of the yield. This is not because there's too much savings in the world, as these ridiculous people at the Fed say, right, or because we got a weak economy coming. It's speculation. People are chasing prices higher and higher in the bond market when they're supposed to be earning a yield for safety. Let me just give you one final example that shows you how absurd this situation is, and it's been driven by the central bank. Austria issued a 100-year bond with a 2% coupon. That bond is now trading at 210% of par. It's ridiculous. People are buying it because the price is going up.
Let me ask for Anthony to respond or to talk about this, and then David will jump back in. I'll say Brian Westbury's coming up in a minute as well. I was just looking down in the next section, next block, as a matter of fact, and he's the guy's come on and said, well, we do have a bubble in the bond market. So what do you say?
Well, the answer is that right now, given the economic growth that we're doing, a little bit over 2%, it's very hard to justify these kind of bond yields. So obviously the yield curves are being somewhat influenced. I don't want to use the word manipulated either by central bank here in the United States, and certainly central banks overseas, because those low rates certainly increase the demand for our bonds.
Do you agree with David on the risks of all this?
But I think there are serious risks. But one point I want to make to David is that, David, you feel that interest rates by the Fed are too low. The Federal Reserve, the administration feels they're too high. Whenever I hear criticism on both sides, it almost leads to the temptation of thinking that maybe they're just right. It's sort of like my kids. One kid says I'm being too harsh. The wife says I'm being too lenient. I'm thinking I'm okay.
David?
So what do you say to that, David?
Well, we got 12 people sitting on the Open Market Committee, which is a monetary politburo, looking at the world and saying, sticking their finger in the air, and we need a 2.2% overnight money, and that rolls through the entire yield curve. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea the right rate. What's wrong with the free market? Just get the damn Fed out of there. Tell the FOMC to retire, get off the playing field, and I don't know whether the interest rate will be higher or lower, but it'll be an honest one. We don't have honest capitalism in America anymore. The free market on Wall Street is dead. Everybody is simply trading the last word and the last clue that comes out of the Fed and other central banks. And the thing is a real mess. They're destroying prosperity and setting us up for a massive crisis that will make 2008 look like a Sunday school
Last
picnic.
point, David, though, it seems to me a little dangerous to assume that nobody should be in control because you feel 12 people have no clue or they're clueless. Just a little dangerous.
Yeah, sure, no one should be in control. What's wrong with the free market? Thousands and tens of thousands of traders and investors and speculators taking all sides of the market and all points of view. That's who should be determining the interest rate, not these fools on the Fed Open Market Committee.
David, one question for you. If you do let interest rates drift up, what does that do to the value of the U.S. dollar? What does that do to the economy? And how might that affect the elections in 2020?
Well, if we had an honest interest rate, honest free market, and the Fed weren't in there, interest rates would probably be higher. The economy would go into a recession. We haven't learned any lessons since the last crisis. We've raised the total debt on the U.S. economy from $52 trillion to $72 trillion. We can't support this. We need a cleansing of this whole mess. And if we were allow this to happen, Trump would be hounded out of office in more disrepute than Herbert Hoover.
I have a feeling, Brian, I want to get the break in so Brian Westbrook get his 2 cents in on this. I'm sure he's listening as he's getting mic'd up right now. And we'll get to him in a moment. David Stockman, always great to have you on and get your point of view. Thanks for coming on.